soldier, you wanted to be in the clergy, you wanted to, I mentioned the army already, but you wanted to be a bureaucrat or maybe a lawyer, or obviously it was great if you were noble, that would be probably the best thing to start off with. But that was, if you were a talented person, that was the way to go, and outside of that, it wasn't very honorable, and it was looked down upon. And she has a ton of material about that in there, about how things are different. And one thing which she does talk to, which is very important to think about, or very interesting to think about, is the way in which our words have changed over time. Well, some of us are aware of this, but sometimes we forget. So a good example is the word honest. So honest used to refer to honor, in the sense of a nobleman, not so much telling the truth. Now, of course, if you read Nietzsche, he'll tell you that only noble people are truthful in the old way. But really, the emphasis was on the person who was, I guess, probably they were more truthful in the sense that they were willing to fight and they were willing to stand up and not and protest against something. But this was a big change. But the bourgeois sense of honest is really about, oh, you're a truthful person, you don't cheat people, etc. It's a very different emphasis. And so in our language, we can actually see a lot of changes. And so that's an example of how dignity has changed. Okay, so to try to summarize what the big change was again. So there was dignity of going into trade and invention. This was combined with liberty to innovate and to trade freely internally. And I think she makes an interesting point that it's kind of dignity came first. There was a new perception. And if you have dignity, your liberty is more likely to be respected. Unfortunately, we can see this all the time in the way that people are prosecuted by the courts. If they're tried in the court of public opinion and they can be made to look like a bad guy, their rights are probably not going to be respected, unfortunately. And Macaulay also makes a point about how in a lot of societies, if something is considered a vice, if an activity is considered a vice, it's usually pursued more viciously in that society, whereas an activity in another place is not considered a vice, it usually has less bad effects on the people conducting it. And McCloskey also talks about people will tend to, if they are in a dignified profession, they'll tend to act dignified as well. So if they think they're supposed to be honest, then they'll want to be an honest merchant. Whereas if all merchants are assumed to be crooks, then they'll be more likely to try to cheat people. So that was a big change. And so the paths to respectability lead not just narrowly to throne and altar. And a good example is the engineer Brunel. Being an American, I didn't really hear about him growing up. But in 2002, they conducted a poll in England of the 100 greatest Britons. And Brunel was an engineer, he was the son of French immigrants, and he came in number 2nd. So it just goes to show how even in how much things have changed in England, that he would come in as the 2nd greatest. And she also talks about they wanted to build a statue for Watt because he created the steam engine, and that was a big change. He wasn't a saint or a soldier. So the social and legal pressure against innovation was lifted, and ordinary people were let loose. Talented people saw innovation, saw opportunity as well. And McCloskey also makes the point that people have to be inspired. Utility is not inspiring, but people will go out and do something like Steve Jobs, which is obvious, but there are also people who are studying all sorts of kind of arcane things and ways to do things better. And they feel fulfilled by doing that, and they're inspired, and they're not necessarily doing it because it's entirely useful, but they're like, oh, well, this is really cool. I guess you can look at any website for computer hackers. They're kind of doing it because it's interesting and inspiring, not just because it's useful. So there was an explosion of applied innovation that created wealth. And McCloskey's really big point, the reason why she's writing all these books, is that our continued and spreading prosperity depends on sustaining the bourgeois dignity and innovation it enables. That's why she's writing these books, is to defend that and to allow us, our civilization to continue to grow and prosper. Okay, so why is the subtitle, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World? I think it's very important, actually. So we talked earlier about how diminishing returns are implied by marginal utility. Her big point, I think, is that economics, as traditionally practiced and written about in a lot of the mainstream journals, fails to fully account for that. It acts as if innovation isn't a factor, as if you can continue to accumulate the same old capital and continue to get returns. And so as we had mentioned earlier, investing in the same old agricultural technology is not going to get you the same results as investing in new technology and innovation. And so it's not just technology, it's also better plant and animal breeding. So this is really technology, it's just a better way of doing things. And so she has a quote here. We start coming to this contrast here between, I would say that a lot of economics is materialist. It's talking about accumulating the same old capital. And she says, if you think of language as being merely a system of signs for pre-existing things, you overlook its persuasive slant. And so a lot of economists just sort of take language as a given and don't see the way that it changes how we look at things or how we think about things. And Austrian economics actually talks a lot about value. So there I think that it kind of fits in with her. Value is how you're persuaded to view the world. So meaning tells us what things are, but they're not. It's not just a given how we look at something. So materialist economists don't think that the material, quote, can have an ideal and rhetorical ultimate cause. So I'd like to point out that right now we're not in a natural world. Material things are transformed by humans into their present shape. These are material copies of an ideal or an idea. And especially look at the chairs you're sitting on, a lot of them are identical. It's a very big contrast to the plant life out there, which is while they're similar, is very, very different. But in a way, you could say they're also similar in that it's the seed of the seed of a plant or the seed of an idea. So you're surrounded by material copies of things, and on top of this, on top of the fact that we actually create this stuff around us, is that language can help affect what we think those things are, what is important about them, how they relate to us, how they relate to other things, and how they relate to people. So it actually has a very big impact. And economics totally ignores this. So her book is an attack on dead materialist economics. A lot of economics focuses on routine and equilibrium. It's just doing the same old thing over and over again. And sort of the market's in equilibrium, everything's evenly rotating. One of Austrian economists called that the nirvana fallacy, because you then attack things because they say, oh, it's market failure because it doesn't equal the routine and equilibrium of perfect competition, whereas in fact perfect competition never exists in the real world. So it's a nirvana fallacy. And so she also talks about in materialist economics, you have the accumulation of the material of homogeneous capital. And then a good example too is this isn't from the book, but there's a story of a physicist after World War II, and a British physicist, and he talked about how if we had government research programs during the Stone Age, we would today have amazing stone tools, but we would have no metal tools. So that's the whole problem, is if economists continue to think that we're just having more and more stone tools, or even better stone tools, they're really missing the point. And she also talks about the contrast between maximizing utility versus innovators. And a lot of standard economists do think about people are just out there to maximize their utility, but as she shows, I think if we think about it, innovators aren't just there to maximize the utility. It's like the innovation is in some ways the utility, or it's an end in itself. a great pursuit, and they're doing something useful which will have an end, but it's also, there's a lot more to it than that. And then she also says that they overly emphasize property rights. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I think there's an important point, which is that property rights without innovation don't lead to much. Though without property rights, I think it's hard to have much innovation. And so instead what we need is a subjective economics of real live people. And as you know, Mises wrote the book Human Action. He's talking about humans and that they act, and that's the fundamental principle of economics. It's not about utility maximization or routine or equilibrium. So you have innovation, you have perpetual movement towards equilibrium without ever really reaching it. And that improvement is subjective. It has to do with the way we look at the world, how we perceive the world, how our language. And then I would also note that, in the case of capital goods, you may say that things appear more objective because you can see measurable productivity increases, and I definitely agree, but it should be noted that it's also a bit subjective in that it's specific to a historic context. So electric motors without electric power are useless. When Edison went out and created the light bulb, he also went out and created the electrical generation and distribution system. So she feels that this book is actually, I don't know if she feels that, but anyway, I feel that this book is kind of a demolition of a lot of kind of mainstream economics. Actually, she's showing how it doesn't explain things, and I think it's very powerful. I also wanted to mention innovation and investment. Key to growth is investment in innovations, and it's conducted by human innovators. And so for her, innovators need to be comfortable and secure, and so they have leisure, but they don't need vast wealth. Wealth pulled from others will fund applications and inventions. Innovation is about improvement, it's about the practical, and especially attention to details, petty details. And here's something that I thought was fascinating, was that it isn't just science. And so a guy, Keeley's, talked a lot about the history of science, and he documented that the great steam engine inventors were not educated men, even though they changed the world. And advances in their field actually had to be scientifically explained later by people like Carnot. So while people think about science as being so important, and it is, doesn't always necessarily work the way you think it is. It's someone like Carnot goes out and comes up with these great scientific principles, and then people go apply them to make steam engines. It's sometimes opposite. The technology gets ahead of people, and then people have to figure out, oh, what happened?